Hey, welcome back. So the focus of this video is setting up your play space. So one of the first things we need to decide is what size is this play space? Well, if we go to Google, and I mentioned before the iPad Air resolution just as an example target resolution. Also, it will fit okay on the web if we downscale. So let's look at that. 2048 times 1536. My first question is, what's the aspect ratio of that? Have a look. It's 1.33333333 to 1. Okay. Which you'll notice is actually the same as 800 by 600. It's also 1.3 recurring. Right, so 800 by 600 is compatible with that much higher resolution. And in fact, when you download your course assets, you'll find that the Blockbreaker Assets Sprites folder contains two background images. This guy here, who's a angry-looking robot or something, which we're going to use for level 1. And then I've just chosen arbitrarily another one, which is 800 by 600. This one's a train track. Just doesn't matter, really. You choose your own images. But they're both 800 by 600. So first job is to get the background image into Unity. So just simply drag into your sprites folder. And there it is. Once it's in your sprites folder, it's just an image. It's simply that. We have to think a little bit about our pixels per unit up here, because we are going to have 16 blocks wide as a total overall game space. And we have an image that is 800 pixels wide. So we want 800 pixels to map to 16 world units, because we're going to go for one world unit per block. World units, for those of you who don't know, are the position in Unity's game space. They're what you see in the transform over in the inspector in the X and Y. They're held as a floating point value, and they are relative to some arbitrary origin in the middle of the Unity world space. So this is about how a certain image in pixels is actually going to be scaled and displayed in the world space. So the pixels per world unit we need is 50. Let's try it and see what happens. So we go for 50 in here and apply. Now drop your level 1 background on. So. There it is. Once you've zoomed in, there is your level 1 background. If you double click on it in the hierarchy, then you will see it on the screen. Now the question is, how big is that thing on here? Let's reset its transform first. So click on the cog and reset. So now the level 1 background is at the very bottom left of the screen. Let's find out how big it is. One way of doing this, for example, would be to grab the main camera. And while you've got the main camera open, I just want you to check that the projection mode here on the right-hand side is orthographic rather than perspective. An orthographic camera does not take account of how far away an object is from it at all, whereas a perspective camera does. So it's important for this project that we're set up with an orthographic camera. Also, while you've got the camera open, I'd like you to check the Z position of the background image up at the top right here. It needs to be in the negative Z, which is away from you. Otherwise, it won't be visible to the camera. So it doesn't matter what distance it's at, because it's an orthographic or perspectiveless camera, but it does need to be away from the camera in the negative Z direction. Okay, so to measure the width of this play space, we move the camera firstly to the left and have a look at the X position. And then move the camera to the right-hand side, and you see it's +8. Great, so the image is 16 world units wide, which is great. I'm going to rename this just background. And I'm going to stick it up right below the main camera, just for neatness. Fantastic, so we have a background that is 16 world units wide. The next thing we want to do, I think, is alpha that background down, which means make it a little bit transparent. Try and make it a little more subtle. So click on your color picker, and you can leave it at white so that it doesn't tint the background, but you can drag the alpha down so that it just becomes more dim. I'm going to go for something like that. Just pick something that you like. That's great. So we have a subtle background. Now what's this thing on here, this annoying thing? That's just its transform. That is just where its anchor point is. So if we click back on our background image and go to the sprite editor, it would be better if the pivot point of this image was at the bottom left. So you can either drag to the bottom left, being sure it's snapped, or choose here and apply. So now when you click on your background, you have your transform tool down at the bottom left like that, which is much more pleasing. If for any reason your transform is showing in the middle of your image like this, then it's this button up the top left here. You have center and global. You may have clicked it across to center at some point. So you just click it back to pivot on the left hand side, and you will then see the transform at the pivot point rather than in the center of the object. So the object is the background. This is showing the center. This is now showing the pivot. So that's just a little gotcha. Let's adjust the camera so it's roughly the right size for the play space. Now you'll notice you cannot change the aspect ratio of the camera at the moment. Why not? Because it's determined by the current size of this game window. If I was to bring my inspector in and make the game window more square, look back on the scene. You see it's more square? So that's actually a problem. We don't want the camera aspect ratio to change as we mess around in Unity. So let's lock the aspect ratio of the game window now. Click on Game. At the top left, you'll see a drop down that says Free Aspect. Well, we don't want Free Aspect. We want an aspect ratio of 4:3, which is the same as 1.33333 to 1. There you go. Fantastic. So now that is locked. So whatever happens here now when we start moving our things around and resizing the game window, the aspect of it is locked. So that's a very useful tool. Right. So next, we need to get the camera to be exactly the same size as the background. How are you going to do that? Well, this is where you need to understand a little bit about what this camera size means. It's currently on my screen set to 7.5. What does that mean? Well, it's 7.5 weld units from the center here to the top of the camera. It's half the height of the camera viewport. So we need a bit of maths again. If our play space is 16 wide, and we have an aspect ratio of 4:3, then how high is it? Well, we have to do 16 divided by 4 times 3, which tells us the play space should be 12 world units high, which means that the camera setting should be a size of 6, half of that. There you go, perfect. Nearly perfect. If you set the transform to 8.6 rather than 8.6.1, now the camera is perfectly aligned. Look, background, image, you can see the image. It has no kind of gizmos around the outside of it. Main camera sits perfectly over the top of it. Great job. So that's it. Now let's just click play and see what happens. Well, we see the background and it's perfectly fitting inside the camera. And if we detach our game tab, then that is all just working fine. But the game over button's being a bit weird. It only shows in some circumstances. So let's just fix that so we can always see it. And the reason is that when we fixed the aspect ratio of the game, our button disappeared off. So just stick it back in the window. And this is a screen space overlay, remember. I've specifically left it like this with our background tiny in the bottom to show you that a screen space overlay just is relative to the screen, and it doesn't care how big your actual background and other assets are. So now, where we see this button inside the screen space overlay is where we will see it when we click the play, yeah? Just overlays over the top. We're going to ditch all that stuff soon anyway, but for now, look, you've done great. If we focus back on our background, we have a background positioned at the origin, just check that. We have its pivot point at the bottom left, which is sensible, and we have a camera that is precisely coincident with what we see there. So, cool, see you soon.